Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining the session on creating a habitat for happiness. We have folks just now coming in from our waiting room, so we'll give them a few minutes to join in here. I am so grateful all of you came. I know it's a busy day on Digital Wellness Day for carving out time to rethink your relationship to tech, but this session, we get to talk about one of my favorite topics, which is how do we declutter. So I'm thrilled to have everybody here. I will wait just a couple of minutes as people are still pouring in. Let me go pedal quick, then I'll take you. Okay. Alrighty. It's extra fun that I get to have my parents on this chat today as well, because they are the ones who taught me all about dealing with clutter. So I'm excited to have them here too. Give it another 1 or 2 minutes before we jump in. If you've been in one of my other sessions this morning, this will sound familiar, but if you wouldn't mind just taking a second to write in the chat about your name and where in the world you are coming from. I've had a lot of fun getting to see how people are literally coming to Digital Wellness Day today from all over the world. And with that, bringing all sorts of different perspectives, as well as wisdom and guidance that has been coming out in some of the chats for events today. So it's been really fun. All right. Okay, so I think all of the emissions we'll try to let in as we go here, but launching in today, creating a habitat for happiness. Welcome. So glad that you're here today. Again, I get to talk with you today about one of my favorite topics, about how we're going to do some digital decluttering and how we can get inspired and motivated to do that in really interesting and actionable ways. Welcome to everybody. We've got Chris. Thank you, Chris, who's one of our instructors for the Digital Wellness Institute, who's joining us here in this call. I've learned so much from him about productivity, and he knows quite a bit about digital minimalism as well. So we may have to pull him in to talk to. We've also got Terry from Tacoma, Washington, Matt from Fishers, Indiana. That's wonderful. If anyone else is just now joining, feel free to write into the chat about where in the world you're coming from. I like to have a real conversation because we're all real people, and it's great to be able to connect in a very personal format in this way. So to launch in, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Amy Blankson. I am the co-founder of the Digital Wellness Institute, founder of my company, which is Fearless Positivity, which speaks about the intersection of happiness and technology. And I'm the author of a book called The Future of Happiness, which we'll talk about a little bit more later. I went to Harvard, went to get my MBA from the Yale School of Management, and am now applying all of those skills while being a working mom of 3 in the midst of the pandemic and homeschooling. So there's a lot of chaos going on in my life. And one of the things that is helping me to keep sane is both colleagues from the Digital Wellness Institute who are helping me to find new ways to be productive, but also to stay sane, and the ability to step back and just take a breather sometimes to think about what can we do right now, right here in the midst of uncertainty, to begin really creating a sense of calm, a sense of focus and flow and peace. It's a work in progress for me. For those of you who know me, this is a lifelong strategy and something that I'm working towards, but it's not something I have completely figured out. But I do want to share with you the things that I do have figured out and the things that I've been learning along the way. A lot of what I started to learn in this field about digital minimalism and about the idea of creating a habitat for happiness came from my research for my book, The Future of Happiness. And I'll share a copy of that with you here. This is my book that came out in 2017. And the reason I'm sharing it is because there is an entire 1/5 of the book that's devoted to how do you create a habitat for happiness. And so a lot of the strategies we'll talk about here today are actually strategies that I go much more in detail with in the book. But when I was researching this, I started looking at the field of happiness and technology with this lens of, let's look at all the new wearables and gadgets that are in this space that are things emerging that might help lead to greater health and happiness. And so I remember in the span of about 6 months, I tested out about 500 gadgets, apps, devices, gizmos, you name it. And I did so thinking if I could just get through the flood of information that people are trying to sort through and provide some guidance about how do you navigate what's worth it and what's not, what's really useful and well researched and what's not. And then I'll put it into my book and I'll help people understand. That's where the premise for my book started. But what happened over the course of tracking along with 500 different gadgets, apps, devices, and things was that I became overwhelmed. And I found that my nightstand in the evenings began to look a little bit like Niagara Falls with all these wires and cords and charging devices everywhere. Sometimes I was trying on multiple different devices at the same time, which leads to feeling like you're vibrating everywhere. You've got your smartwatch on, I've got my posture trainer, I've got my shoe sensor trying to help me to be as healthy as possible with my gait and my walk. And within a very short period of time, I found that I started to go a bit crazy and needed to pull back. And so the idea was, why don't we start to look at things in our lives in a different way? What do we really need? What is it that creates that sense of happiness? Because if you're like me, we have all these gadgets and gizmos that are supposed to make us happy, but they don't necessarily. And then we throw them into a bin or a closet or multiple closets, and we create what's called the tech graveyard. And I'll share with you my ongoing tech graveyard that I continue to work through. If you give me a second here. This is real life. This is my tech graveyard right here. I have so many gadgets and wires and old kids' devices that I'm trying to sort through. And it's this process of figuring out, how do I decide when is it time to recycle? When is it time to let go? Where do I take it to? How do I make this happen? So if you're in the same place with having a tech graveyard somewhere or all over your house, I want to say don't despair. That's why we're here today. We're going to come up with a great plan of action that you can walk away from here today knowing what to do with all these old things that I call your tech graveyard. Because digital wellness is all about giving intention to our attention. So I want to empower you today with some not only intention settings, but also some action setting to leave here with. So that being said, we're going to talk about 5 questions, and at the end, I have 5 answers for you as well. So stay tuned for those. But the 5 questions I want to hit on first are, why do we care about clutter? How do we get here? Why is decluttering so important? Why is it so hard to let go of stuff? And what can we do to get rid of it? So as we are walking through these, I'm letting people into the waiting room. So if you're just joining us, I hope you'll share in the chat where you are coming from, what your name is. We're glad you're here. Thanks for joining in today. So first, why do we care about clutter? What is it that drives us nuts about having clutter in our space? I think there's a few things. One is that it's anxiety producing. We get overwhelmed with stuff and we don't know what to do with it. And so that causes a little bit of uncertainty in our path. The second thing is that it's guilt inducing. We feel guilty, whether it's because we are worried about wasting things or because we like having shiny new objects, whatever it might be. But I call this the got syndrome because it's guilt over things. We feel guilty about not having dealt with this email, or we feel guilty about not responding to that text message. We feel guilty about having a broken laptop around that someone could use if you could just figure out where to send it. So that's what I call the got syndrome. The last thing is fear perpetuating data insecurity. And to put that in more familiar terms, we are paranoid that we're either going to lose files or precious photos and videos, and we don't know where they're going to go. They're out there in the cloud, but what if it gets deleted? What if they become invalid formats? And so we start to worry about all these things. And as we do, it begins to weigh on us and it takes away from our feeling of happiness. Now, before we get to how do we fix it, I want to take a step back to look at a walk through history about how we got to this place where we have so much stuff in our lives. So how do we get here? The first reason we're here is because of a fellow that you may never have heard of before. His name is Gordon Moore. And Gordon Moore created what was now called the Moore's Law and eventually the more than Moore's Law, which is basically that he predicted that in a span of about 2 years, the size and the processing speed of microchips would double. He did this way back in 1965, but what's crazy is that he was actually right. It doubled in processing speed every 2 years for a long period of time. Now it's slowed down a little bit. But what we saw is that as microchips became faster and smaller, products came out constantly, more and more products. And as we did so, we began to upgrade and we began to add new things. So a computer that might have lasted 5 or 10 years before is now going to last 2 years tops, or maybe even a year. And that means that we've got to figure out what to do with the old stuff, right? So speed of innovation was one factor. The second factor is that we bought into something called the technology promise. We believed that if you could just find the right device, that it would make you more efficient. And if you're more efficient, then you'll be more productive. And if you're more productive, then you'll have more free time to do the stuff you really want to be doing. And then that will lead to happiness, right? But we know that doesn't always follow that pattern. In fact, we fall prey to this over and over again with marketing. And one of my favorite examples was the Roomba vacuum that came out many years ago. And they continue to upgrade it and make it better and faster and more efficient, able to see items that are in your carpeting. And this little robot will go and vacuum your house for you. And when the Roomba vacuum came out, this was a real post that was on Amazon. This individual said, "I love it, love it, love it. I don't have to spend time vacuuming floors every day. I don't have to worry about under the bed or the couch. It all gets done for me. It's so easy. Just push the clean button and away it goes." And that's what we envision or hope for our technology, that we can just have some magical solution and it's going to make things so much better that we'll be happy. But that's an elusive strategy that doesn't always follow suit. We see that upgrade culture has left us with more and more devices, leading to more and more waste. And of course, having a system to deal with this, or a lack thereof, has contributed to the chaos because we don't have places already established or processes for how we're going to get rid of them, where we're going to go, how do we keep things secure. We crave structure in our lives, but the rapid transformation of this technology makes us unsure. How are we going to create that new sense of order? And we keep trying to create new habits without actually dealing and prioritizing the habits in our lives that are creating the problem that we're facing. And so that's what I want to do today. Otherwise, we wind up with that tech graveyard. So 3, why is a habitat or a happy habitat important? Can you not just get by in a cluttered, not happy environment? Well, sure you can. Of course you can. But imagine this. Imagine getting to work and having that space in your life where you have clarity of thought, where there's not constant distractions, where you're able to just breathe in and out and have this focus for your day. That sounds amazing, right? But it's pretty hard to get to. That being said, we shouldn't give up, because what we know from research is that the law of pregnance says that we tend to order our experience in a manner that is regular, orderly, symmetrical, and simple. And the best way to decrease stress is actually by removing stimulating objects from our visual field. Now, this is interesting to me because in my book, I write a little bit about how we got to the science of distraction that we have today. And it turns out that so many of the devices that have led to the constant distraction we face were actually built for NASA in order to get in touch with astronauts in space who they needed to get messages from ground control up to space to the astronauts. But they recognized that not every message that they sent to space was actually life or death, that sometimes they were just FYIs and sometimes there was some important information, but it wasn't urgent. And so they actually hired a consultant to figure out how best to capture the attention of those astronauts. And in so doing, they began to create things that we're very familiar with today, which is flashing text, different color text, bright lights, vibrations and different sounds. And as such, now we've all become experts in how to get a hold of people. If they're not going to answer you on this line, we're just going to call that line. If they're not going to answer you by email, well, we'll send them a message on Slack and text. And so we do these things that's constantly causing us to have continuous partial attention in our environment. And yet we know that a habitat for happiness is one where it's less distraction, more focus, so that we can really begin to do the things that we want to do. But there's a couple other reasons why I want to hit on beyond just your happiness and having a cleaner space that helps you to think. And that is that your perception of your space matters almost as much as the actual space itself. So, preeminent positive psychology researcher Sonia Lyubomirsky, who was actually part of our kickoff event for Digital Wellness Day on Friday, she actually had this idea called the 90-10 rule that she shared in her book, The How of Happiness. And what she says is that if you tell me how much money you make, where you live, and how many pets you have, I can accurately predict your happiness levels by exactly 10%. Because the other 90% of your happiness is up to your perception of the world and your genes, which means that, yes, 10% comes from your environment. Whatever's going on in your environment can have an impact on your happiness. But what's more important is that your perception of how you feel about that environment is actually more important. It's 90%, which says to me that if we can shift and shape the way we perceive our space, that can actually lead to greater happiness, which is fascinating. My husband also did some amazing research in college when he was at Harvard. He researched Huntington's disease with mice. And what they found was a finding that's actually relevant to all of us, and that when you provide environmental enrichment for a mouse in a space who's been given the genetic code for Huntington's disease, what they found is that those mice over the course of 12 weeks were actually able to get through mazes faster, more efficiently, and they were able to build the memory, which means that on a cellular level, those mice were actually experiencing changes to their mental capacity because of their environmental enrichment. And enrichment meaning that they were given challenges, or perhaps they were given treats along the way, or maybe there were obstacles they had to overcome. So, being able to perceive our environment in a way that enriches us actually makes us not only better intellectually, but cellularly, which is phenomenal. So the fourth question that I want to address is, so if we know all these things, we know how we got here, we know why happiness is so important, why is it so hard to let things go sometimes? Turns out that it actually hurts. Like, physically hurts us to let go of things. When the researchers began to do an experiment where they gave people in an experiment a mug. They gave two different groups mugs. And the first group, they let hold on to the mug for an hour. The second group, they let them hold on to their mug for a week. When it came time to give up the mug, the group that had had the mug for an hour willingly gave up their mugs. The group that had had their mug for a week suddenly felt an emotional attachment to this object and found it much harder to give up. These are just plain white mugs, no difference, but the longer you hold on to it, the more it physically ignites the pain receptors in your body to part with things, which is, something I think that we can relate to, but man, it makes it difficult to let go of things, especially when you have other factors like sunk cost fallacy, which in economics means that the longer you hold on to an object and the more money you paid for it, the more you feel like it has a value that's harder and harder to let go of. And so the longer you keep it, the more you feel like you have to keep it. The third is that we're unsure what to do with some of our devices. We have things that are broken, that have data on it that we don't feel secure about letting go of. And so we feel like it's better to hang on to things rather than to risk that insecurity. But it turns out that there's a cost to us as well, in that when we don't have space to create space for new things, not only does it impact our happiness, but it also decreases our ability to be as functional and as productive in our current space as we can. And we don't have space for the future. So, what I want to talk about today is how we can embrace this idea of digital minimalism. Digital minimalism. So, digital minimalism, according to Cal Newport, is a philosophy, a technology in which you focus your online time on a small number of carefully selected, optimized activities that you strongly support, that you align within your values, and then you happily miss out on everything else. So, forget every shiny object and all those 500 devices and gadgets I had. Let's whittle it down to just maybe 5 things that are really valuable that can actually move you forward, that you can stick with. That's what embracing digital minimalism means. It doesn't mean stepping away from everything altogether and detoxing, because I don't think that that's a realistic solution in our current day and age where we're living in this remote work environment. and hybrid work environments, and we're dealing with so many things that we have to be fluid with our technology. But what it does mean is that we can take a closer look at what we do have and then start to have a process for how we're going to deal with it. So how do we do that? Well, one alternative or one option would be something called the really rule, which my brother taught me actually. And what he did is when I was trying to move, my husband and I were in the military, and we had to get rid of a lot of our clutter before the military movers arrived. My brother followed me around the house, helping me declutter by going, "Really, Amy? Do you really need that? Really?" And it's amazing what having that face that looks like this does for your ability to suddenly see clearly. All of a sudden you think, okay, maybe I don't really need it. I just kind of sort of wanted it. But it really brings it down to, what are you really going to do with it? What's your real plan? Let's get realistic about this. So you can use the really rule, which is one option, but I think that there's a more systematic approach than having somebody follow you around and be that voice in your ear that says, really? And that is these. These are the 5 answers I previewed for you at the beginning. And they are to create a vision for what you want your habitat to look like, to take stock of what you do have currently, to cut the clutter and the actual process of removing it, and then to stand back and admire, and lastly, to defend your space. We'll get to that in a little bit. But creating a vision, and what I'd love for you to do is to actually answer this question for me in the chat, because I think that we all have different visions for what happiness might look like, or what a habitat for happiness might look like for you. In my mind, as I prepared for this workshop, this image I actually pulled straight from potterybarn.com. I did. It was on their homepage, and I just love the idea of having that light, clarity, space, organization. You'll notice there's no technology except for a laptop in this picture. I don't care. It just looked beautiful. And I imagine that would be lovely to have. And of course, in my brain, I'm thinking, if I only had this, then I would be happy. And we all know that that doesn't always fall true. I also know that everybody has a different approach to what their habitat looks like. So this image is actually Steve Jobs' office. It is a wreck. If I worked in his office, I would never get anything done, because the more chaos there is, the less organized I am. But it turns out that Steve Jobs was famous for working in a messy environment. And he would often say that if his office wasn't messy, he wasn't actually producing anything. So this for him was his happy place. This is what a happy environment looks like for him. It stresses me out, but if this is your happy place, absolutely have at it. And maybe I can loan you some people who can help add some more clutter, and that would make you happy, and that would be great, right? But for those of you who are looking to step back and pull things away and move towards digital minimalism, there's another way. So in the end of this session, I'm going to share with you a worksheet that you can actually use, and maybe I can put it in the chat here as we're talking, a worksheet that can help you take stock of your tech graveyard. Let's see if I can pull this up here while I'm talking. That might be a bit of a trick. We'll see. Okay, I'll do it towards the end so that I can focus a little more with you. But what the worksheet will do is it'll walk you through how to take stock of your tech graveyard. And as you're doing so, I want you to think through, and if you have a scrap sheet of paper with you, it might be helpful to jot down a few notes for yourself. But the first step is to think through where in your living environment do you currently keep all of your unwanted, outdated tech? Is it in the closet? Is it in a drawer? Is it in upstairs bedroom? Is it everywhere? Is it in the living room? I want you to write down every location where you tend to have that stockpile of cords and wires and things. And if you have to go walk through your house, go for it. If you can, gather everything you can into one pile in a room. This is a strategy I learned from Marie Kondo, who talks about the joy of tidying up. And she talks about how important it is to actually gather everything into one space. Plays a secondary role that when I'm organizing my desk, for instance, I actually take everything off my desk, put back exactly what I want to be there. And then I have this whole pile of other stuff I need to deal with, but it's no longer on my desk. So now I actually have to deal with it. So gather it all together. Second, I want you to stop and think through, what is your current process for getting rid of unwanted tech? When you have something, is it put it in the closet, we'll deal with this someday? Or is it that you're going to maybe revisit it every spring to do a spring cleaning, or maybe every couple months, or you have a process where you're going through it weekly? Whatever works for you, think through what your current process is, and then think about what are some of the stumbling blocks to your process. Are there questions that you have about where to recycle things? Are there questions about how to dispose of sensitive data? Is something missing a cord, or the screen is broken and so you can't actually access anything? So what are all of those stumbling blocks? This is part of taking stock of your digital environment. And the third is cutting the clutter. This is the fun part. This is where you get to dig into actually making change in your house. And I think it's worth recognizing that clutter is not just physical clutter. It's not just computers and wires and cords. There's actually other kinds of clutter, including notification clutter. That means that if you have all kinds of notifications coming through on your phone, that they can cause the same kind of physical and emotional reaction as physical clutter. So by turning off notifications from anybody that is not a human being, so turning off stocks and sports updates and game alerts and all of those things that distract our attention, keep us from being as focused and in flow as possible, then we can, you can have a little bit more clarity of thought process. So that's notification clutter. We'll talk a little bit more about it. Digital clutter is things like files on your computer, photos, video files, and things like that that you're trying to figure out how to deal with to organize your computer. But we want to dig in first to physical clutter and a process for how do you deal with it. And I call the process stop, drop, and sort, because the temptation is to put this off for another day. It feels overwhelming. And so your brain thinks that the bar towards accomplishing this is really high, and it's really not. It's just about activating, making a plan, and following through it. So when I'm sorting, what I typically do is I'll make 4 different piles. I'll make a pile for what I want to keep, a pile for what I want to sell or recycle, which sometimes is a fine line if you're not sure if it has value, a pile for donating, and a pile for trash. Now, when we're doing this, the things that you want to keep, I want you to think about, why are you keeping it? What are you going to do with it? Is it something that you haven't used for a while? What are you going to do to actually start to use it? If it's something that you want to sell or recycle, you think there might be value there for yourself as selling it, or for someone else by recycling it, then there's 2 websites that I want to send you to. I think that poweron.com is something that can be used internationally. Best Buy is not everywhere in the world, but if you happen to have a Best Buy, it's a great store where you can take things to be recycled. There's also office supply stores like Office Max or Home Depot and places like that that will offer to help you recycle things. But Best Buy actually offers the opportunity to purchase some of your technology that may have value and you didn't know it. And what I like about their policy is that they actually have a data destruction center on site. So you know when you give them their tech, even if you haven't wiped the system, that they will do it right there with you so that you can actually be assured that your technology and your data is secure by letting go of it. So when I went in to donate my things, I had some things that had a broken screen, so I couldn't actually turn it on to get rid of the data. So it was a great peace of mind knowing that their system wiped it, destroyed it, and it was on. Poweron.com also makes it simple. They'll mail you a box where you can put your technology in it. They'll send you a check, and that's it. So you don't have to go anywhere in the pandemic. You can just do an exchange through the mail. For donations, if you happen to have a school in your area or even a maker space, they actually accept broken, old, unwanted tech. I know sometimes charity organizations will or won't accept, but maker spaces and schools do, partially because their students are learning how to take apart the technology, and they need things like motherboards and they need wires and cords to teach people about how things are created. So that's a wonderful opportunity. And lastly, the trash. If there's a bulk trash or hazardous trash day and you're in your city or your community, that might be something that you can use to dispose of larger objects that you can't normally get rid of. I want to pause here though, because this is the heart of really creating that habitat for happiness. And I want to respond to a few things I see here in the chat. So I know Teresa's mentioning that in France, they have recycling centers. That's amazing. They can gather everything in an ongoing process and it gets moved to the recycling center. That would be the ideal. I wish it was that easy here in the States. I know other Countries are also in progress with developing these systems, but that's a wonderful model for those of us who are in leadership roles or influence role or an advocate role, that we can create something similar to that in our own communities. Nicola also mentioned, there's just too much in my house to gather. I hear you. It's in every room but the bathroom. I have iPods from the early days of Apple, multiple laptops too. It's made me think about letting go this weekend. Yes, that's awesome. I hear intention and I hear deadline. Good for you, Nicola. It will feel so much better. I also see from T. Roberg, it might be a good excuse to go to France to recycle. Can I come with you? Yes, I would love to do that. That's a great idea. I'll just take my whole box. We'll go to France. We'll take care of it, right? I'm sure that Teresa won't mind that at all. So the second type of clutter we talked about is notification clutter. And I just had to put in this image of the raccoon. He just made me smile, because sometimes I fall into the trap of getting the new shiny object. I'm a bit of an early adopter. I like technology. I like being at the front end of things, and I like keeping things that look pretty. And shiny things in my environment that typically stick out at me are things that capture my attention. But when we talk about notifications, we are trying to eliminate as many notifications as we can that are non-necessary, that are not helping us move towards using our technology with its highest and best purposes. And so there's a couple of ways that you can decrease. Number one, turning off alerts, which we talked about. Two, pruning your acquaintances. That means that maybe you have too many friends or followers on social and you don't interact with any of them, or maybe you have too many people on your phone and you don't even know who some of those people are. Go ahead. It's okay to prune acquaintances. For the most part, nobody will know. And then you can really focus in, or even make a list of some of those people who you really want to be in touch with and prioritize them in your email inbox. I think you can actually set certain people as priority VIPs in your inbox so that you make sure that you respond to the people that are most important to you. The third is to automate the mundane. And I realize I'm going through this list backwards, but I can see you're tracking along with me. Automating the mundane means taking things that you do over and over when you're getting onto your computer and trying to make it less painful. Whether that's having a password manager or a list of passwords so that you don't have to constantly go back and forth to figure out how do you log into things, where do you go. But also automating the mundane might be if you continue to get the same kind of messages over and over, whether text or an email, you can either clear those notifications, or in your email, you can set up templates or auto filters so that you can eliminate some of those things. That's a longer process that's in my book, and I'm happy to talk about more offline. But that's certainly a strategy that I found to be very helpful, is automating as much as possible. And lastly, unsubscribing. Now, I know that getting rid of unwanted emails and unsubscribing from things that aren't important can be really hard and tedious. You can do it by unsubscribing to each individual email, or you can use a service like unroll.me, which has been known. I will just let you know that they have had trouble with amassing emails and capturing all of the different sites that you have subscriptions to, but it is a great service in the sense that it can unsubscribe you from everything and roll all of those newsletters you get into one email so that you can sift through them much faster. But do your research on a service that you like for unsubscribing. There's some sticky points that I think that have caused me to not use it, but it could be a service that might be helpful to you. I found that one of the notifications that I was getting a lot of was when I was writing for Forbes as a contributor. I get hundreds of pitches from companies who wanted me to blog about their technology every single day. And so I automated the mundane. I filtered through all of those so that I could flag them a little bit easier. And I did use unroll.me for a little bit to be able to cut back on that and then shut it off. So that's another option for you as well. I love this picture about, it comes from The Art of Manliness, whatever that means, but it talks about decluttering your digital life. I thought it was such a great image of what we can do on our phones and our devices to begin to do the same process we do offline with our phone process, getting rid of things we don't need, focusing in so we can have digital minimalism. I see a comment here before we move on from Teresa about notifications and emails. She says you can remove a huge amount of clutter if you eradicate CC and BCC wherever possible. Ooh, that's a great tip. You can also implement a company policy, no reply necessary. Another great idea, which you can add to the subject line so that people know they don't need to hit reply just to say thank you. Yes, that is one of my pet peeves, Teresa. You're so on it with that there's a lot of unneeded messaging just to say thanks. Oh, thank you. No, thank you. So if there's ways that we can cut back on that, that would be great. For your digital clutter, let's talk for a minute about your photos and your files on your computer, because I know when I speak with different clients that there's a lot of anxiety about using the cloud, particularly for individuals who are non-digital natives. Not having your file on your computer can feel like a source of insecurity. You can't get to it quite as easy, and you also don't know how to access it if you forget the password. Unfortunately, the world is moving towards the cloud, and we're finding that more and more companies are cutting down the size of memory available on devices to force people into using the cloud. And so even on my MacBook Pro, they don't have as much space. There's no ports to begin to import and export information in the same way. So learning how to get comfortable with the cloud is a skill set that we need to continue to build a growth mindset towards, knowing the world's moving in that direction. How can you store things and back them up so that you do feel safe and secure, and so that you know how to get to your data? That's important. One of the other things I do to get rid of stuff on my desktop is that I will also just organize my files by size. So if you open up your documents folder, your Finder on a Mac computer, you can organize documents by size and start to cut down the biggest files fastest. And if you need to put them in the cloud, you can do that. If you want to access it, and you can put it in an external hard drive if that makes you feel safer. But whatever you do, you get processing speed, you get space to think and be and organize when you get rid of all the big stuff and all the extra files and the redundant folders. I don't know about you, but sometimes I have like upwards of 5 copies of the exact same photo. So they have programs online where you can go through your online photos and it will pull out the copies. There's a couple of different programs out there that are like that. I think the one I was using is called Photo Swap, but I can find out for you. I also archive old emails. I like to keep them just for data history and information, but you don't need them all in your inbox. So if you're one of those people who's like, I have 56,000 messages in my inbox, my husband, then you can begin to archive some of those so that you can really see and flag when that information is popping up for you in the moment, so you can be as responsible as possible. And lastly, one of my best strategies is just to clean off your desktop. Even if that means take everything that's on your desktop and put it into one folder called desktop files, that helps you to just have less distractions in your field of vision so that you can focus. This is a strategy we teach at the Digital Wellness Institute. It's actually in the Digital Wellness Playbook that we just released in March of this year, that is to help team leaders and teams to begin to think through how they can bring digital wellness to their teams. And the CLEAR method is simply clear your desk and inbox, physical and digital clutter. Lift your computer to avoid tech tension. So this is, I actually have an ergonomics chair. I have an ergonomics I don't know what you would call this, scaffolding underneath my computer so that it can lift it up so that my computer is at my line of vision. I eliminate my distractions as much as possible. I have a dedicated workspace that I've activated in my home. And sometimes that migrates, but I know how to get myself set up and to move quickly so that I can have a fresh period of thought. And lastly, refreshing your office by adding a plant or a photo or something that makes it just beautiful and feel like a space that makes you happy. So that's the CLEAR method. The last step is just standing back to admire. We don't take enough time to celebrate, but if you do all this work, you absolutely should take a step back to celebrate and enjoy your beautiful space, enjoy the time and energy you have to work. Let that feeling of happiness just sink in so that you can enjoy all the work you just did. And last, defend your space at all costs. Now, I laugh at this one because, of course, we don't need to get violent with keeping our space clean, but we did invest a lot of time and energy in doing this process. And if there's people in your environment who continue to clutter your space or add things in, it's great to set expectations either verbally or visually to help them remember to not continue to bombard your space because you're trying to protect that safe space for yourself. So I actually did this when my husband and I organized our closet. We had so much stuff in our closet. We had this center table in the middle that we continued to pile laundry on when we didn't want to fold it and put it away. And so finally, I went through, we cleaned out the closet, and my husband has this ridiculously large statue of an Alabama Crimson Tide elephant. So for those of you who are international, that is a football team that my husband loves here in America. And their biggest rival is the Auburn Tigers. And so I put this giant, ridiculous statue on my counter in the closet, and I put a sign underneath it that says, the first person to put something here is an Auburn fan. So I'm using competition, I'm using humor, I'm trying to defend my space because we work so hard to create it. And it just made me smile when I saw that because it was a playful way to keep things light, but also to keep my habitat in a way that I liked it. So knowing that today is Digital Wellness Day, I want to ask you what will you commit to doing today? What kind of plan could you create to start doing this? Hopefully you are inspired that you absolutely can deal with your tech graveyards and that doing so will help you to have a habitat for happiness. But it's going to require some effort of pulling stuff together, sorting and sifting, and then actually taking action. So what I'd love for you to do, whether in the chat or on a scrap of paper just for yourself, is I want you to write a date by when you want to be done with this process, because this should not stretch forever. This is not a lifelong process you need to drag out. This really is an afternoon of knock it out, let's get done, let's make it happen so that we can get on with life. So write down for yourself a date by when you want to have been through this process so that you can create that habitat for happiness. I also want to share with you my book before we do a Q&A here, so that you can go through and dig in a little bit more detail to some of these topics that we covered pretty quickly here today on how to create a habitat for happiness. We focused most on clutter, digital, physical, and notification clutter here today. But the chapter on creating a habitat for happiness also delves into different spaces and domains that we have and where we create happiness, like where you live, which is what we focused on here today, where you work, how do you create a workplace culture and community that feels like a happy place? How do you do that in a school setting? And what does that look like within the family setting? And part of what we discuss a little bit more in detail that I love and want to just hint at here today is this idea of setting digital boundaries in the same way I set up that ridiculous elephant as a kind of visual barrier boundary in my closet. We can do the same thing with setting up digital boundaries in our lives, in the sense that we can tell people about when we're going to be offline or we're stepping away from our devices. We can set device-free times like meal times during the day, or times when you're connecting with loved ones, or times on your calendar when you're trying to be creative and you need time to just focus and you want to block that time out. So these are what I call setting up invisible fences. And in the book, I talk about how when I used to live in Virginia, we had a dog that loved to roam, very friendly dog. But in Virginia, the neighborhood we were in didn't have any fences between the houses. It was these big rolling lawns, and they ran one lawn into the next lawn into the next lawn. And so a lot of people use what's called an invisible fence to train their dogs not to leave their lawn. And so we called the invisible fence people to come out and help us. And what they explained to me was that the dogs wear a collar that has a gentle vibration that teaches the dogs when not to cross a certain boundary line. And the boundary line is a little wire that is planted under the ground that's invisible, but it's present. And when they teach the dogs about where the boundaries are, it takes about 3 days. And then after that point, about 80% of dog owners actually turn off the invisible fence that they just paid all that money for. It's underground, they're trained, and then the dogs just know where to go and they don't cross the boundary line. And in my mind, not only is that fascinating from a behavioral perspective, but it's also a vision of where I'd love to see us get to as an organization, as a society, as a community, about having some real digital boundaries in our space, that we are so well trained that we don't have to keep stumbling over these boundary lines of texting people after hours or in different time zones, or bombarding people with too many emails that we forgot to BCC them on, or we just simply sent back that message, thanks again, and annoyed somebody. So we have these boundaries that we're learning. It's a new skill set, but maybe there's some things that we can start putting into place right now by creating those invisible fences that will help us set up for a future of happiness. I get into all of that and more in the book. So if you want to order that, it's on Amazon, or you can just go to futureofhappiness.com. For the chat, Aaliyah, BCC stands for blind carbon copy. And perhaps it's called different things in different countries, but when you're sending a message, you can send a message directly to somebody. You can CC them, which means carbon copy, which is the old days was like when you wrote a check and there was a separate sheet of paper underneath the check that was a carbon copy to just provide information. It's more like an FYI. And then there's a blind carbon copy where you can send a message that the original person you sent it to doesn't know that they're being informed of somebody else on the other end who just wasn't an FYI, but didn't need to be included on the original message. All of these very small ways that communication gets filtered through society. And for those of you who missed Erica DeWan's talk earlier today, it was right before the session, she was talking about what's called digital body language, and how our digital body language and some of these behaviors and strategies that we have adopted into our behavior and our language and our way of being are things that we can start to rethink how we're doing them. And she has a whole masterclass course on how do you create better digital body language. So you can check her out as well if you want to. Her session is going to be posted later today on the digitalwellnessday.com platform. This session, yes, Kit will be recorded, and I'll be posting this one in about an hour as well. And so you'll be able to rewatch it, you can share it. And I'm also going to include in the event link the option for you to download that worksheet that I mentioned. In fact, I'm going to try to do that right here so that I can give it to you while you're in this meeting, because I know that that would be a valuable resource for those of you who are interested in getting started today. Okay, there it goes. It's going into the chat. It's called 10 Steps to Deal with Digital Clutter in your life, and it gives you a worksheet of how you can plan and make a consistent check-in checklist. I noticed some of you have written in that this is a process that you're already embedded with. You do this on a monthly basis, maybe even put it on a calendar to ensure that you don't have things pile up for you. But whatever works for you, setting a process, setting some deadlines, setting your intentions. We know that individuals who set their intentions are 40% more likely to achieve their goals. So if you set your intentions, that will get you started on your way here today. So I'm going to pause there. I want to see if anyone has any questions for me, things that I can answer. I know there's a lot of details, a lot of information. So if you have questions, please go ahead and pop them in the chat, or ideas. I love the sharing of ideas here. I love also my dad's post that your assignment today is to take photos of clutter and then periodically take photos of progress. Fantastic. I can't wait to see this, Dad. Other things. Okay. Romy said she couldn't see the link to the file yet. Let's see if I can try to upload that as well. And if you want to check out my website, futureofhappiness.com, later today, I'll also make sure that this is listed in the resources as well. So I can get it to you, or I can send it out to everyone who's on the chat here as well. So we can do that. Perfect. Any other questions that anyone has for me? I know there's a lot of great expertise that's here of people who are on this call who've got things that work really well for them, processes that they like to use. Anything that's sparking an idea for you? All right. Well, if you think of things, my hope is that you will share your progress, your ideas and inspiration. You can do it through social and tag me. I would love that. Brigitte, yes, go get started pruning. I'm glad you're motivated. I'm motivated too. I still have more things to go through today. I'm also playing the role of helping my parents and my in-laws and helping them to go through their houses and their spaces to create a space for happiness. And they help me too. And I think it's that give and take and having accountability and doing this kind of process with somebody that makes it just a little bit less painful. So don't be shy about asking other people, and you can maybe trade services. One person can help the other person if you have other people in your space to do that. Oh, and I love that comment that somebody just recently had new flooring put in their office, so they were forced to take everything out. And once the new flooring went in, they made sure that it all didn't come back in. That takes a discipline. That takes a lot of ability to really be intentional about dealing with things and not letting it pile up. But it's just setting aside 1 hour on your calendar and marking it as, this is the time I'm going to deal with this. I'm going to do it. I'm going to put it on the calendar today and I'm going to go knock it out. So I encourage you. I wish you all the best of luck. If you have other questions for me, feel free to send them along to me through my website, amyblankson.com or futureofhappiness.com. Thank you for making the time. Thank you for celebrating Digital Wellness Day with me. And I hope you enjoy all of the other events taking place today. I'll post the replay here shortly and wish you all the best. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Amy.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, thank you.
Thank you.